So welcome back to another Penguin Strategies HubSpot Hacks. I'm very it's great to have Gabe from HubSpot. He'll go into a few details and obviously um, go through the agenda, but obviously introduce himself before. So Gabe actually is the GTM manager for the CMS Hub. And he'll explain exactly, I think, a bit what he does. But we're going to be focusing on personalization strategies for your business and how to use HubSpot, something that Penguin and my team have been using for quite a while. Not enough, obviously, but I'm really excited to focus on this topic today. And obviously, we'll send out the recording, whoever could make it. But I think we can kick it off. So, Gabe, first of all, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited to be here and share some knowledge about personalization with you all.
Okay, great. Do you want to give a bit of background, kind of who you are and how you got to HubSpot? I know it's quite an interesting story.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually started out in the agency world. We were an open source agency actually, and then we came across HubSpot, and we were really well known in the open source world, and then really fell in love with HubSpot. Started using the CMS product really early on, got really good at it, and then eventually got acquired by HubSpot's largest agency at the time. Um, and then I spent some time on their leadership team, leading RevOps and leading the website side of the business. And then eventually made my way over to HubSpot, where I've been for the last year and a half now. Um, yeah, and so it's been a wild journey in the world of web, and I think probably in those 20 years I was in agency land, I probably created somewhere over 450 to 500 websites, within that period. So done a lot with websites in that time.
Great, great. So, just one quick question before we dive into this. How do you? I mean, that's a good perspective. 20 years, kind of looking in the web and seeing how it's progressed. So, besides the changes in technology, and some of those we'll actually talk about, Um, do you think the goal of a B2B marketing website has changed over time in the last 20 years, or is it still kind of the same
You know, I,
kind of?
the goal of the website hasn't changed. How you get to that goal has changed massively as technology has changed, and as has society changed, and there's so much that's changed over the years. But I mean, the goal is always the same. People are looking to get their message out, get traffic to that message, capture leads, and eventually get those leads over to their sales teams. And so it's for most, it's nothing's changed there.
But for the buyer, it's changed. His expectations, I think, over time has changed. It's like I don't really. I'll speak to someone when I need to speak to them or when I want to speak to them, but give me all the information wherever I am, when I am, so that I don't have to, I can do the comparison. I can check out your website. I can find out your pricing. I can know as much, virtually give me as much of the journey that I can do by myself. And then when I feel comfortable to speak to someone, if I do need to speak to someone in the specific case, then I'll reach out and buy your product. Or if I could do it by myself, it would be even better.
Yeah.
I think that's changed over time, and that's the biggest change that I see. I think it's the kind of the same paradigm shift that happened when the iPhone came out. And now everyone is expecting everything to look great, and that's where I think design and development and everything changed because of that. The expectations are at that level now. The same thing with the buyer's journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from the buyer side, it's changed massively. We've early on we saw that shift of power with inbound, kind of when the inbound philosophy came in, and that started to make the shift. But you're continuing to see deeper and deeper. The buyer really want more information and want it quickly so they can make decisions more than ever.
And that's a great segue to what we'll be discussing today is a personalization. As my expectations as a buyer is for me to be able to get the right content at the right time. On the other side of the coin, it's our job to make sure that we can actually personalize as much as possible the right messaging and the right content and the right information. And I think that's also where it's also changed. Is more of our job is to educate, especially as marketers, but also as companies, and less to try and sell. And then it's okay. We'll solve for you and we'll help you, but I need to make sure that that is personalized as much as possible. I think that's one of the challenges that we're going to try and. I think what you put together here gives a great strategy.
Yeah. I think that's a good segue into even our first topic, which is why does personalization matter? And these are some of the topics that I just wanted to cover in our chat today. But first, covering why personalization matters, how to design a personalization strategy, examples of personalization gone wrong, exactly what you don't want to do, and then how to implement your personalization strategy. And then, we'll have some Q&A, of course, at the end. But I think just to start out, maybe we can ask a little question here is, why does personalization matter? Why should we spend time on personalization? And I want to start out by asking the question to all of you, why does personalization matter? Why are you all here to learn about personalization more? And maybe we'll just take a second and just let people respond in the chat to that and just kind of get a little bit to get better engagement. I see here. Let's see what else. Connection. Let's see. Leave another second here. So why does it matter? Well, more than anything, customers want and expect it. And in 2023, personalization is essential. And I want to ask you guys another question. Can you guess what percentage of consumers expect highly personalized experiences these days? Give it just a second.
I can't answer because I can see the answer, so I'm not going to answer.
Yeah.
No, but it's very interesting. Okay. Oh, it's very interesting. 60% I can see.
100%. Some good answers. So if we go here, there we go. So the answer is 71%.
Wow, that is high.
Yeah. 71% of consumers expect companies to deliver highly personalized experiences across all touch points. And that's according to some McKinsey research that was done. But more so, the research also found that when customers don't get this personalized experience, majority of them end up frustrated. So additionally, according to an Accenture study, 83% of consumers are willing to share personal data to enable personalization. I mean, to me, that's pretty crazy that consumers are so hungry for personalized experiences that they're willing to share their personal data. And so,
do you think that shift has also got to do with social? That anywhere we used to sharing that data, but if I get value in return, then or do you think it's not connected? I mean, people are used to sharing their data now through social anyway.
Yeah. I think it's part of it. You have and you have different audiences. I think some people are very willing to share. Some people are a little bit more cautious. Some people are very cautious. And I think it social definitely has something to do with that, as that's become a little bit more normalized, and just as people start to understand more and more what people are doing with their data. But I think as you'll see throughout here, later on the presentation, there are definitely advantages to sharing that information. And when you can, I think, show users the advantages of that, they are a little bit more willing to share. And I think that actually segues right very well into this slide, is it really surprising though? Because these days we all expect these digital experiences to be seamless. I think just like you were kind of alluding to earlier, you have companies like Amazon and Netflix and Uber, and they've really set the bar for that standard, smooth, one-to-one experience. And the bar, it's really been set high nowadays because of these companies. And so because we're seeing it in that B2C world, consumers are just starting to expect it in the B2B world now as well.
And then it kind of seems off if you don't get it. It's like, okay, you don't know who I am. You probably, haven't done your homework. You obviously don't exactly know what to offer. I'll jump to the next website or solution and hopefully there they'll be able to give me a better solution.
Yeah.
Better experience.
I mean, with that bar set high, everybody expects that same experience across the board. And it doesn't really matter for B2B, whether you're mid-market, SMB, B2C, it's all the same expectation. And that personalized journey is really the default nowadays. And B2B marketing leaders are starting to increasingly understand that personalized experiences are no longer a nice to have, but they're becoming a necessity these days.
Great. Interesting.
Here's the beautiful part though. So building these world-class personalized experiences, it's not only good for the end customer, it's also good for the company. And McKinsey calls personalization the Holy Grail, so to speak. They cite a recent Harvard study that shows personalized experiences can do a few things. One, they can reduce acquisition costs by 50%. Two, they can increase revenue by 10 to 15%, with some digital native companies seeing as high lift as 25%. And they can increase efficiency in marketing spend by 10 to 30%. I mean, who doesn't want to reduce acquisition costs and increase their revenue? The numbers are pretty convincing in themselves. But there's still work to do. So when Forrester surveyed end customers, a majority of customers cited their experience as it was okay. It was nothing to write home about. Is this depressing? Maybe. But personally, I see it as exciting. Why? Because this is your opportunity, if you think about it. So customers expect seamless digital experiences. Good experiences impact the growth of the business, but a majority of current experiences are okay at best. So creating personalized experiences is a huge, huge opportunity that can give you a strategic advantage over your competition. And so, of course, you should all embrace that opportunity.
It's an opportunity to delight your customer, where the expectations on the one hand are high, but the norm is relatively low in the B2B world. So it's like a window, if I understand correctly. What you're saying is that if we look, I don't know, it's very hard to look at timelines today. Until with 5 years down the line, maybe it's 5 months, or maybe it's 10 days. But irrelevant, if you start now, then you still have that window where, once everyone's doing it, then the bar is going to be even lift higher. So for sure, this is a great opportunity.
Yeah, now's the time. Now's the best time to take advantage of it, because once everybody starts doing it, it's going to be a lot harder to continue to grab people's attention, where now it's a very open playing field. So we know why personalization matters now. So let's switch gears a little bit and look at how to design a personalization strategy. And before I really dive into that, the first question you really have to ask yourself is your marketing program mature enough? Are you ready to invest the time in personalization? And I think in the past, it was really seen as a nice to have for most marketers. And a lot of marketers, personalization was stuck at hello, first name, in your emails. And it was something that if you had some extra time, you'd get around to it. But nowadays, there's nothing that matters more than having that right context and improving connection with your users, just like I think somebody said in the chat earlier. So yes, it doesn't matter if your marketing program is just getting off the ground, or if you have an advanced and mature program. Personalization really needs to be part of your core program. It's no longer a nice to have.
So it's not that I should wait until, do I have enough content? You should already start thinking about the strategy and then build that in and then build it up as you're going to show from day one, and not say, okay, well, because like with blogging and stuff like that, okay, I can't nurture because I don't have the content and I don't know that. So it's also something that you kind of should also start from, and scoring. Those are the three things I think you should start thinking about from day one, even if you don't have everything in place, so that you build it correctly.
Absolutely. And you may think, hey, maybe we're just starting out. There's not really ways they can do personalization, but there absolutely is. And we'll cover that a little bit later on when we start to talk about our different subsegments
Right.
and so on. But when we look at what makes up a personalization strategy, we have 5 different areas we want to look at. And the first is goals. What challenge are we trying to solve today? Are we trying to improve a demo page conversion rate? Are we trying to increase upsells? The second is called subsegments, or how will I divide my audiences to target them with personalization? And this is different than personas or segments, and we'll discuss that why in a little bit. The third is data. What data do I need to be successful? Do I have the data that I need? The fourth is what personalization tactics I use. And a lot of times people, this is the first thing they think about when they think about personalization. They think about, well, how am I going to do the personalization, without really thinking about the first kind of 3 things we went over, which are the core of it. But what tactics I'm going to use to deliver my personalization? Will I use content swapping of text and images, pop-ups, emails, something else, And finally, just reviewing everything. How am I going to measure success? And am I ready to continue adding more personalization, based on the results that I'm seeing? And so if we go in to take a closer look at each of these, the first one's really understanding what challenges personalization can help you solve. So some of the common areas can be improving conversion rate, improving website engagement, increasing cross-sell, upsell, or resell, to help target specific accounts or companies, and just overall improving the overall customer experience. These are some of the levers that we can pull to improve the performance of programs. And once we understand, how we can leverage these levers, so to speak, we can start to get very specific with our goals. So I want to improve the conversion rate on my demo page by 10%, for instance, or I want to increase the time on page on our services page. I want to increase my resells by 25%. So we need to ensure these align with our bigger business goals, of course, as well. We don't want to just be doing personalization to be doing personalization. We want to have some very specific goal in mind.
I had a question yesterday before you move forward, a quick question from a customer asking, I'm not going to go into detail now because it's not that relevant, but the crux of it was, we have a lot of SEO traffic coming to our main website. Now we want to introduce a new product. And a lot of people actually signed into our product, so we know who they are. How do we actually customize that so that we can give the new traffic a different experience and take them into a different journey? And they were asking, okay, we'll go into details today to actually show how to do that. But it was a very interesting question, because it was like, okay, I've built out all this, brand awareness that I'm using, but there's kind of an overflow that I can use to introduce new products. But what happens if those new products, brand-wise are a bit different, and I need to show them a different look and feel? How do I use personalization with, instead of saying, okay, let's go to a brand new website, a new URL and everything, which is great, but then I start from zero, which doesn't make sense. And I said through HubSpot and through the personalization, we'll be able to probably solve that.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very good, clear example of an use case of how you can use personalization to make that experience different to the different audiences, and you'll very quickly know, who your known or unknown users are, so to speak, because of that user behavior. So another thing to that's important as part of this process is aligning your teams. So there's going to be several teams involved in creating and responding to users who've encountered personalization. You have the marketing team who's, creating the personalization. You have a sales team who is then adjusting to the response that somebody maybe had to personalization. You have a customer service team who could be responding to it, content and advertising teams. And so these teams really need to work together to align, but working together, they can deliver that high impact experience, and that can help increase sales effectiveness and ultimately grow revenue and customer satisfaction. And so that's something I think that also gets overlooked sometimes, is not just thinking about it from the lens of the marketer, but thinking about it from the lens of the other flywheel teams, within that business. And so that's a critical piece that you don't want to necessarily overlook.
For sure. That's great.
Our next step is called subsegments. And this step's really all about how will I divide and target my audience. And so this is who you want to personalize to. And you'll notice I call this subsegments, not segments, not personas. And while your personas or segments will certainly have a heavy influence on how you divide your audiences, subsegments are groups within your segments or personas. And one of the key reasons for that is that at least 95% of your traffic will be unknown users. And I won't have the same level of data as I will with a known user. So we have to plan subsegments for both our known and unknown users. And so we can first look at our known users. And so typically when you think about personalization, what comes to mind is these known users. And we know who they are typically by a cookie that gets set when they fill out a form. And we know who they are, and we can be very specific with that targeting. So for instance, I can create a contact list based on everyone who's a CEO in the software industry, and then target users of that group if they visit our services page. Or I could simplify and make a contact list based on anyone in the software industry. You have a ton of flexibility here. Under the first bullet point, you'll see some of the most common properties we see used to create these known subsegment lists. I also can use some of the grouping and targeting methods used for, unknown users, like targeting geography, language, ad referrals, link clicks. They're typically done by looking, at the IP address, the browser language, or a URL or a tracking code that was set. But the problem with known users is they're typically only 1 to 5% of the users on your site. And so what about that other 95%? And this is where your unknown users come into play. And as I mentioned in the last slide, we can group and target these users based on web engagement or pretty much anything they do on our site. We can do it based on geography, like country. We can do it based on an ad referral that they clicked on, which can be very effective. We can personalize, the landing page that they come to, for instance, based on which ad they're clicking on to make your ad spend more effective. We can personalize based on links that they might click on a page, what the language of their browser is, or even just if it's as simple as device type, so mobile, tablet, or desktop. And the key here is to ensure that you're thinking about both known and unknown users. And when you're thinking of creating your subsegments, I can create many subsegments or just a couple. I would recommend, when you're starting, just to have one known and one unknown and start building from there. You can always add more later. For example, instead of having subsegments for each industry for known users, maybe choose the industry that has the most opportunity or that, your business encounters the most. And then as results start to come in and you see that working, you can then start to add more of those subsegments as you need. The big thing is don't overcomplicate things. You'll see why as we talk about, in our next steps here, which is data, our next steps in our strategy.
Let me just understand something before we move to that. So for example, I can be using either referrals or from an ad. So if they were coming, I don't know, from a partner's website, even though they're not in my database, because of that referral, we could actually show, okay, if they're coming from my partner, then they're obviously interested in this specific service because that's the service that our partner helps us market and channel. And then when they come to a certain page of the website, then or if it's the homepage, they can see our co-marketing partner solution.
Yep. Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I
So
mean, there's so many possibilities. It's almost more about the creativity and kind of thinking about all the different angles of where people are coming from and what the different situations are that are
that's
sometimes.
really powerful, because I think most people, including myself over time, thinking of that, I have to know, it's only what I know about the user, and this is information that I know, but it's an unknown user that's not in my database. So that's really powerful.
Yep, yep. So I want to talk a little bit about data now, because this is something that's very important to personalization. And it's, I'm sure, every marketer's favorite subject. I don't know if anybody knows this movie, and I may be dating myself with it a little bit, but this is Office Space, a classic from my younger years. And these gentlemen all work, for those of you who don't know, all work in an office together. And this is the printer that keeps constantly jamming, and everybody hates this printer, and it frustrates them. It's pretty much the bane of their existence. But finally, they take the printer out into a field one day to get their revenge, so to speak. Let me see if this will play here. There we go. Here's them getting their revenge. And this is what I feel like every marketer thinks about when we talk about data. However, data is really important, and you can't do personalization without the right data. And so, that brings us to our next phase here, which is data. And when we're considering data, there's a few things we need to look for. And the first, that the data exists. Do we actually have the data that we need? Remembering all those characteristics we defined in the last step for subsegments. Are you collecting the data for those characteristics? If not, then we're going to talk about how you can start to collect that data. But one thing I want to point out as well is when it comes to behavioral data, things like what a user clicked on, what pages they viewed, when they last visited, and way, way more data. With HubSpot, there's nothing you would need to do for that. It's already automatically tracking that for you right out of the box. It's going to be clean. It's going to be really easy to use for your personalization. So you don't need like a really complex solution with like a CDP and multiple systems that you put together. It's going to just be right there for you out of the box. But the next question to ask yourself about data is it accurate? Is it correct? How well was the data collected? I'm sorry. Was it imported from like a Zoom Info or an Apollo, or did the actual customer provide it? And then finally, what's the confidence in the data? If the data is not good, sometimes it's just better to dump it and start over. And then finally, is it clean as well? Are you using open text fields where you should be using dropdowns, and you have no consistency in your data? Do you have data that's spread across multiple fields? Maybe the data is in duplicate fields and they conflict with each other. So you're really going to need accurate data and clean data in order to do personalization. And this will be very evident a little bit later when we start to talk about personalization gone wrong. So since we're talking about data, just a few best practices I wanted to point out. First, you should be cleaning your data at least every 6 months at a minimum. At least that's what best practice experts recommend. But honestly, who's got time to clean out your data every 6 months? And I know I sure didn't, and that's why you can automate cleaning your data. And of course, you want to also purge data that you don't need. And so I can tell you, I should say, I can't tell you how many accounts I've looked at that have had maybe like 1,000 contact properties, and they really just needed a fraction of that. And so they didn't clean their data, and they didn't really purge the data that they didn't need. And it just turned their account into a total mess over time. Finally, if we look at some point, sometimes it just becomes such a burden to clean the data that, like I kind of mentioned earlier, sometimes it's just better to purge and start over fresh. And that's okay. And honestly, I've seen that happen way more than you think it does, because sometimes it is just easier and the data is so bad, and it's and when the account was initially set up, I think this is getting better now. As marketers are starting to get more mature about collecting data. But I think back in the day, data was just an afterthought. It was not something they even thought about. So when these initial counts would get set up, they would be set up so poorly that it just created that mess. And so sometimes it's easier just to start over. And so I think there was a question of, do we ever fear that if you automate data cleaning, something important will get lost? And I think that all depends. And that's, for anybody who's wondering, how do I automatically clean my data? HubSpot has a product for this called Operations Hub. And these are a few screenshots from it. This is the Data Quality Control Center, but it gives you an idea of how, your data's health and allows you to fix it. I mean, when we're talking about cleaning data and cleaning it for consistency, sometimes it's just as simple as, hey, I want to format all of my phone numbers in the same way. I want to make sure all of the names are capitalized in a certain way, or that they're formatted in a certain way. And then a lot of the other things are going to be just through having drop downs, for instance, instead of open text fields, which is a big thing, and starting to kind of clean that up. And so it's more about getting control of your data. And I don't necessarily fear automating cleaning your data, as long as as long as you're setting up the right fields to be cleaned. I'm not necessarily going to clean an open text field. That's probably something that would get done a little bit more manually, at least initially. And then once it's in a good spot and it's in a more controlled property field, then you can kind of start to automate the cleaning and so on.
Yeah. A lot of the time you can also create your new pick list or your new data, and then you have them in parallel. And then once you feel comfortable that everything's working, then you switch over and you can, get rid of that. In a lot of the cases, you're not going to be able to get rid of that that field if there's data inside there anyway. So you're going to have to clean that out and actually clear that field completely on all the contact records. But those are more data fixes that we can do. But it's worth it, because it's something that if the more you go forward and you don't do it properly, then you're going to bump into, whether it's personalization or anything else. Road bumps.
That's a really great tip. And I think that starts to kind of segue into our next piece here, which is, what do you do if you don't have the data? And part of that is first start collecting it. But also, kind of like you were saying before, you can start collecting it in parallel with your old data, and then kind of work on cleaning it. But updating your forms to start collecting the data. If you need role and you need industry, update your forms to include them, right? Just start to collect them right away. Start to update your forms so you can start to get that data. Then start thinking about data collection campaigns. So if you all remember earlier, we talked about a stat: 83% of people are willing to share personal data to enable their personalization. I mean, you could do giveaways to collect data. Fill out this form to help us personalize your user experience, and we'll enter you into a drawing. You can include pop-ups on your site that'll ask simple questions. What is your role? You could do surveys. There's a lot of different ways you can start to engage your audience to collect data. And you want to, supercharge that data collection effort by creating some of these campaigns and starting to get the data that you need to enable the personalization that you want to enable.
And you can also use progressive profiling on your form, so you don't have to go and re-ask what you already know, but, again, keep it with the basics so they understand where they're coming from. But as you said, that's great. Then I can actually focus on one or two fields that's asking for the next time, especially if these are people coming back to your website.
Yeah. I mean, progressive profiling is also one of those features that kind of flies under the radar. That's I feel like underutilized. But I mean, for nothing else, even if you're not even collecting data or using it to help you collect data, which is the big advantage to the business, but it just creates such a better user experience for users, not having to fill all that out. So I think the next big question is, should I enrich my data? And so when talking about data, that's one of the most common questions I hear is, should I enrich my data using a third-party service? Should I go out and buy some data? And so depending on who you talk to, some may say yes and some may no. But when it comes to personalization, for me, it's a big no. Third-party data often isn't reliable. And if you get personalization wrong, it's a huge, huge hit to users' trust, and you never want to lose your users' trust. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit. But for me, when it comes to personalization, skip the third-party data enrichment services. It's a big no-no.
So I want to add something to that quickly because I think that's important. One of the things I've actually had this question quite a lot, it'll be interesting to what you think, is that if I am using third-party data, is to create a separate field so that I don't override the form submission data. And then I can do the differentiation. Obviously, personalization, it helps me because then I don't override anything. I can still use the information that I'm getting. And then the third party for enrichment, if I need it, if it's missing for the sales team, they can look at that and say, okay, I don't have, I don't know, industry, but they haven't answered that question, but enrichment tool A, B, or C is telling me that it's there. So at least I can have that conversation and use that as a sales tool or as a marketing tool. But personalization, I agree with you, is taking it one step a bit further because it might not be. Okay, so I think that's another reason to actually keep it separate. That's great.
Yep. So the next step in the personalization journey is the actual tactics, or how we're going to deliver our personalized message to our user. These are some of the most common tactics that you can kind of see on the screen here. There's web content replacement. This is where you change the copy images, video, or a CTA on a web page based on who that user is. Personalized ads to the user, dynamically generated emails, and finally, I can trigger powerful automation based on a user's browsing behavior. And these tactics give you a plethora of options to deliver that personalized message. And I'm just mentioning these right now. Later on, I'll kind of talk about them more in depth as I have kind of a whole section dedicated to that. But one thing that can help you choose which personalization tactics to use is mapping out your customer journey and looking at the path users are taking through your website and all the touch points they encounter. And so when you look at what pages they're visiting, you're looking at what pages they're visiting early in the journey. That might be good targets for an unknown user, or maybe some more simple personalization. As you look at pages they're visiting later on in the journey, that may be useful for known users and more specific personalization. So it's important to map out that customer journey, and that can really help you, as you get more advanced with your personalization, that can help you really understand where to target users and with what by mapping out that process. And we have a tool actually that'll help you do that called Customer Journey Analytics. And I'm really excited actually about this because I can actually put in what my known sub-segment properties are. So if I want to, for instance, look at everybody who was in the software industry and was a CEO, I can put that in as a filter, and it'll show me the journey that those users took and the path that they took through my website. And so it maps out that journey for me, and then I can look and see how should I target those users. So I don't necessarily have to guess at that anymore. I have a very concrete way of seeing that right out of the box.
So I don't have to define what I think the journey is. I just put in that specific list or context, and it will actually show me what's happening on my website.
Absolutely. Yep. And so this is actually something that's in Marketing Hub Enterprise and was launched earlier in the year, and super exciting feature.
That's brilliant.
And the final step here is just to review and optimize the performance of your efforts. And designing a strategy is important. Arguably more important is determining if it worked. And so considering how frequently you'd like to review the results, how to document learnings, where to communicate information, and when to invest in additional personalization efforts are all, part of that review and optimize process. And so just to recap, we looked at goals, what challenges are we trying to solve? We looked at subsegments. Who am I going to personalize to? We looked at data. What data do I need to be successful? And do I have that data? We looked at personalization tactics. What tactics will I use to deliver my personalized message? And finally, we looked at review and optimize, how I measure success, how I optimize what I have, and am I ready to add more personalization? And one final note on strategy, we did kind of touch on this a little bit, but I really encourage you all to start small. I've seen too many efforts get stalled out by designing too big or too intricate of a strategy. You know, you could just choose one page to start personalizing, choose one sub segment. Don't let data hold you back. A lot of times that's where people end up getting stuck, is by getting too entrenched in the data and not allowing them to just start it. You know, start fresh if you need to. And finally, choose one tactic to get started with. You know, I usually like to start with just web content replacement. It can be as simple as personalizing a landing page, or a web page. You know, just start small and just get started. That's I think a big tip.
It also probably builds confidence in your strategy, in the tools themselves. You see how it works. You can get feedback from your customers, from users, and then you can broaden it out into more specific tactics. No, that's great.
Yeah. So now let's switch gears and talk about personalization gone wrong. This section I like, but it'll show you, I think, the power of having bad data sometimes, and where you can really lose trust with users. But we talked about what personalization is and what matters, but let's take some time to discuss where personalization is not, and why a strategy takes a little bit more finesse than just, you know, the emails that get sent that just says, you know, hi Gabe or whatever. So personalization is not just replacing hi there with hi Gabe. It's not building the world's largest data warehouse in hopes of one day leveraging that data in an email campaign that might happen on a third full moon of the fifth lunar cycle or whatever. And it's definitely not buying data from third-party vendors. And finally, changing the colors of a button on your website also doesn't just fall into the category of personalization. These are really just surface level things, and they're not going to give you any sort of, you know, meaningful effect necessarily by personalizing experience like that. Let's also touch on where personalization can go wrong, or where our personalization projects can fail. So we already touched a bit on bad or complex data, but that can very easily kill a personalization project. Too much complexity can prevent projects from getting off the ground, and bad data just kills trust. This, however, doesn't stop companies from using bad data. A recent research study showed that 59% of brands use out-of-date information about their customers, and 57% get customers' personal details wrong. Let me repeat that. 57% get customers' personal details wrong. That's really, really, really bad. And as marketers, we need to make sure we're doing better.
But you've never got a phone call from a telephone company offering you a service that you're already paying for?
Yes, or with an incorrect name, or at an old address, or whatever the case is. Yeah, definitely. Another personalization killer is an overly complex tech stack. Having to cobble together several systems like a CDP and a marketing automation platform, a CMS, and more can be really, really difficult, and it takes a lot of time. If you're using HubSpot, you won't have to worry about that. But looking at personalization as a one-time process is also another way that you can go wrong. Personalization isn't something that you necessarily just set and forget. Lack of resources, we talked about earlier. There's going to be a lot of different teams involved. It's a team effort, which really needs to be prioritized. And finally, too much personalization, or personalizing too soon, also known as being creepy. Don't be creepy. Personalization is about trust and transparency. And according to an Accenture report, 27% of consumers reported a brand experience that was too personal or invasive. And almost 2/3, 64%, said say it was because the brand had information about the consumer that they didn't knowingly or directly share. So brand and consumer relationships are no different than their real life counterparts. When one party goes outside of the relationship for information, the level of trust is completely broken. If you went out on a first date and your date knew personal information about you that you hadn't shared and wasn't publicly available, how might that make you feel? It might start to feel like you're on a date with Beetlejuice here. And this is, by the way, another reason we don't recommend buying third-party data for personalization. above all, you never want to break your users' trust, and you want to be transparent about data usage. So let's look at a few examples of personalization gone wrong. In the first one here, this brand send a congrats on your new baby email. The problem is the user is dealing with infertility and Mother's Day just passed. In the second, this brand targeted a user with a message around getting married. The problem is the user is in fact single, and it was an unwelcome reminder for them. And in the third example, you can see the classic hi F name email that I'm sure you've all received at some point. But here's the thing. I've actually seen way, way worse examples than these. There were some examples that were just so bad that I felt like they were in poor taste to even include them. And remember that stat from a few slides ago that 57% get customers' personal details wrong. I mean, think of the negative impact bad personalization caused in these instances. I know those that created these assets didn't have bad intentions, but the implications of those errors were substantial. And you never want to find yourself in a situation like these.
Yeah. Very careful. Interesting.
Excuse me. So we know what we need to do to create a strategy. We know what not to do and some things to look out for. So now let's discuss how to implement the strategy. And what I want to focus on here, just the different tactics you can use for personalization and the difficulty of implementation. You're just going to see that I have a key I'm going to use for each tactic and whether or not you need to use a developer to implement that tactic. The good news is a majority of these you won't need a developer for if you're using HubSpot. 101 means no developer needed. 102 means you do need a developer. None of the developer tasks, though, are very time intensive necessarily. And also, as we go through these, you might start to wonder, what HubSpot products do I need for these features? And the answer is Marketing and CMS Hub Pro or Enterprise. Generally speaking, email features are in Marketing Hub, and most web content features are in CMS Hub, though there are some that are in Marketing Hub as well. You'll also notice a Pro or ENT to indicate which level is needed for that feature. And the first and most common tactic we see is web content replacement. And what this is the ability to just replace the default content with personalized content. HubSpot has 4 different areas for web content replacement, and those can be used both on your website and in email. And smart content, which is the ability to copy and to swap copy images or video. You have smart call to actions, or the ability to change CTAs, smart forms, which allow you to decide which fields to show to a user on forms. And finally, dynamic content that allows you to display information in your CRM dynamically based on who that is. And so let's start with smart content. Smart content is a marketer-friendly no-code tool that allows you to swap the content on a page or within an email based on who that user is. And with smart content, I can create a landing pages like a demo, for instance, that has a different value proposition and images based on the user that's visiting. Or I can create an email that would promote one set of events to one group of users and another set of events to another group of users. And you can see in the example here, they switch the image and copy based on the user's location and the time of year it was for that user. And so if you think about an international clothing brand like Shein, for instance, which is based out of China but ships worldwide, they'll have users in Australia where it may be summer, and they'll have users in the US where it may be winter. And so this is just an example of some simple personalization that allows this brand to very easily change the page based on what location they're visiting from. Another example of web content replacement is this is Microsoft. The content on the left is targeted to a B2C user. So they're promoting Surface Pro, and the content on the right is targeted to a B2B user where they're promoting Office 365. And there's multiple ways to accomplish this for known users. I might know their role or company they work for. If they're an unknown user, I could base this off of previous browsing behavior or click activity. I know we're getting close to time here, so I'll start to kind of try and speed up some of these tactics here. But we have smart CTAs as well, marketer friendly, no code tool as well. This allows you to swap the CTAs on your website or an email. You can see here in this example, this is a navigation that contained a call to action, and they swapped it out based on who the user is. So for instance, if I know a user is a CEO, I might choose to show an offer about revenue generation. If the user's in IT, I might show them an offer about security. Or let's say they're a CEO and they already downloaded an early stage offer about revenue generation, and I know they're in MQL already. I may then choose to show them a demo or a consultation CTA instead, pushing them to that next stage in the life cycle. If any of you haven't seen our CTA tool recently as well, it got an update earlier this year, and you can get very, very targeted with your personalization and targeting with those CTAs. And so it really opened up and I think changed the game on targeting around some of these CTAs.
Yeah, it's amazing. Really cool.
So smart forms, this is what you were talking about a little bit earlier, Mark, with progressive profiling. Also a marketer-friendly no-code tool that allows you to dynamically show what form fields to show a user. And so I can progressively build that profile. And so if you look at the example here, I have an early stage offer like an ebook. The form I'm showing this user initially will maybe have their name, email, and company. They come back and they're interested in a middle stage offer. I already know their name and email and company. So instead, I'm going to ask them their needs and maybe what solution they're interested. And finally, if they return again and are interested in another offer, this could be another middle of stage or late stage offer that I'm just going to maybe ask for their role and their time frame. And again, we're building that profile progressively of that user. You could also just use this to build interest profiles. So if you see a behavior that shows an engaged user, use a pop-up form to ask them what their interests are, what their role is, maybe some other information. The key here is engaged users. We don't want to bombard users, especially ones that aren't as deep down in our cycle. And we can build that profile over time on future visits with small and simple questions. And this will help fill that data bucket so you can better personalize to users in the future as well.
Okay, cool.
And finally, our last example of web content replacement is just dynamic CRM enabled pages. This allows you to dynamically show content to users. So you may be wondering, what's the difference between smart content and dynamic content? So in the example above, they're using real estate data from a custom CRM object to show listings to users. So with dynamic content, I could look at the user's address or city and show them the 10 properties that are closest to them. With smart content, the content you're swapping is static. So I'm able to pick 10 properties to show to specific groups, but everyone in that group is going to see those same 10 properties. So with dynamic content, I'm able to personalize content to each specific user instead of a group of users. Dynamic content does require a developer though. And so that's something just to keep in consideration.
But that's really powerful. If you have a use case for it, it's really, wow. That's great.
Yeah.
We got to look at that one.
So next, let's talk about ad targeting. What this feature does is allows you to change the ad on advertising platforms like Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, based on data. I'll kind of go through these quickly now, just so because we're running short on time. Here's a few different ways you can target ads. In the first example, it allows you to target based on pages they visited within a time frame. The second allows you to target based on contact lists you've created, and the last is based on companies you've selected as target accounts. You don't need a developer for this. It's super marketer friendly. And you can, for instance, use some of those in combination for using your ad personalization and then personalizing the landing page that they might land on. So you could use some of those in combination. Next one is programmable email. And the concept of programmable email is similar to dynamic web page content that we saw earlier. What this does is it allows you to create an email that is unique to each individual user. So instead of having to create like 10 or 50 different emails, you can create one email that's dynamic to many different users. And so in the past, you maybe had a giant campaign with 63 emails and 21 workflows and 168 CTAs, but I might be able to just knock that down to, a few emails in one workflow. Custom behavioral events is the last piece. I'll just kind of skip that for now. And just to kind of wrap up before we get into Q&A and some of the other topics we wanted to talk about in these last few minutes here. just some key takeaways and tips from today, but start small with the personalization process. Target a single subsegment to start. Ensure you have good data, but if it comes to detractors, start fresh. Choose high value opportunities. Don't just personalize to personalize. Make sure it provides value and solves a problem. Create opportunities throughout the flywheel and go deeper on personalization as you get deeper into the flywheel. And create bite-sized pieces that support broader campaigns. You don't need each page to be 100% custom to each segment necessarily. Build strategies that can be supported across many channels, but also make sure content is appropriate to each channel. And lastly, have fun. Personalization can be an amazing user experience if done right, and be creative and have fun with the process.
Okay, great. That's amazing. So if anyone has any questions, I think this is the right time. We have about 2 minutes. So we also want to showcase something. But if not, we can also, obviously we're sharing this recording, so you'll be able to go into this. I think Gabe and I talked about not going to the nitty-gritty of actually how in the back end of HubSpot doing all this. Everything's in the knowledge base. Everything is in Google. Just look for it. You'll find it in a few seconds and then play around with it. Start with small, as we said. And then once you play around with it, really, you don't need any developers or anything. You go in and you'll see that you can. What I did want to showcase for 1 second, because I think this is really cool. This is something that actually Idor from our team built with one of our customers. And I think they won an award already for this. But what they did in essence, if you can see my screen here, is they've built a personalized guide for targeting TV advertising. And then you go in and you start, sorry, I went in the wrong way. You start filling this out. Okay, hang on 1 second. Why is it loading for me? Okay, because it came back. So watch. If I go into incognito, we can share this as an example, but the idea is that you fill out a form, and then based on the answers that you actually get, we don't have time to go through it, we actually redirect you to this page. And what's happened in the back end of this page is that depending on the answers, on the questions that you actually answered, it loads, it takes time, it gives you a personalized version. So if I chose that I'm interested in targeted advertising, if I've chosen I'm interested in specifically AVOD and fast, then it will show this section to me, and it won't show the section to someone else. So that's the way that we did it, and it's actually, this is running on HubSpot. They actually built it in a way that we built out, like, think about it, a full grid with all the content. And then based on who we know you are, we use the smart lists. We've actually hidden sections that aren't relevant from what you chose. So in essence, you'll get your personalized version, and every single time you come back, if you cook it in, you get the same. We can share this if anyone's interested to see how this works. We'll be happy to show you how we did it.
Really cool example, Mark. Very cool example.
So Gabe, thank you very much. I think this is, I know we're over time now. I think this is really great. And as you said, the idea is to start with, like, CTAs is a no-brainer, is to start playing with it, and then going into a landing page and taking a different section and people that come back, especially areas of your database that you know people are coming back to, like a form or resources. If you think about it, if people are coming to those resources pages, maybe you can start personalizing those sections. So as you said, it's just think of your creativity and the customer journey. I think that customer journey part, if you do have enterprise or any other tool, to start seeing what's happening so you'll know where to actually do that. But as you said, start with an email, start with a CTA, feel comfortable with the technology because it's really simple. And then you can start to taking it from there. Okay, great. Thank you very much. So we'll have this recording and part of, I think, the presentation we can share with as well. Gabe, thank you very much. This is really really interesting, and I'll be excited to see. Maybe we can do a follow-up in 6 months' time and see how many people actually start using the personalized personalization, especially in HubSpot, because I think most people HubSpot users here on our webinars.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.